Caught my sister-in-law spreading lies about me to my in-laws. She said, "You're just jealous." So I exposed her darkest secret, and tore the family apart. I still remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong. It was a sunny fall afternoon, the kind that made Portland feel like magic. The trees were just starting to turn, and I was sitting on the back porch of my parents' house, nursing a glass of iced tea. Clive and Odessa had just announced their engagement a few days before, and my parents were over the moon. Mom kept going on about how Odessa was exactly the kind of woman she'd hoped Clive would marry. It wasn't that I disagreed. Odessa was beautiful, smart, and polished, with a confidence that drew people in like moths to a flame. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off. Odessa and I had never been close, despite my best efforts. Every time I tried to connect with her, she'd brush me off or make a passive-aggressive comment that left me reeling. It was like I was constantly walking on eggshells around her, and yet everyone else seemed to adore her. At first, I told myself it was in my head. Maybe I was the one being overly sensitive. But then she started making comments to my family. Small, seemingly innocent things that somehow made me look pathetic. It started with offhanded remarks to my mom about how I was so independent for living alone, or how sad it must be to have no one to come home to. My mom, who's always been obsessed with the idea of family, latched onto these comments like they were gospel. "Ilora, sweetie, don't you ever get lonely? You're not getting any younger, you know," Mom would say, her voice dripping with concern. "Mom, I'm only 32, I'd respond, trying not to sound defensive. "I'm fine. I like living on my own." "Well, Odessa just thought, she worries about you," Mom would insist, her tone suggesting that Odessa was some kind of saint for showing such concern about my life. At first, it was annoying, but I figured it would blow over. I'd always been close to my family, especially Clive, and I didn't want to stir up drama. But over time, things escalated. Odessa began telling my family that I was too sensitive, that I didn't know how to handle criticism. And worst of all, she started hinting that I might have a problem with alcohol. The first time I heard about it was from my dad. He and I were sitting on his front porch one evening, a quiet moment before dinner. He was watching the sunset, and I was scrolling through my phone, mostly zoning out. Suddenly, he cleared his throat. "Ilora, can I ask you something?" He started, his voice hesitant. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" I said, setting my phone down. "Odessa. She mentioned something to your mom and me." He paused, as if he didn't know how to continue. "She said she's worried about how much you've been drinking at family gatherings." I froze. "What?" "I don't know," he continued, clearly uncomfortable. She thought you might be drinking a bit too much. I told her you were fine, but your mom, well, she's a little concerned." I was stunned. "Dad, I don't even drink that much. You've seen me at these gatherings. I'll have a glass of wine, maybe two. That's it." "I know, Ilora, I know." He patted my hand reassuringly. "It's just. Odessa says Clive's mentioned it too." And there it was. My brother, my best friend, the one person I'd thought I could rely on, was feeding Odessa's lies. I didn't know what hurt more, that Clive would say these things about me, or that my parents were buying into it. Over the next few months, things only got worse. Every time I tried to talk to Clive about it, he'd brush me off. "Ilora, you're being paranoid," he'd say, his tone dismissive. "Odessa's just trying to help, maybe you're the one who's a bit defensive." "I'm defensive because she's spreading lies about me, Clive." I'd snap back, feeling the anger bubble up inside me. He'd just shake his head. "You're overreacting." It was like I was invisible, like nothing I said or did mattered anymore. My parents started looking at me differently, their faces clouded with worry or disappointment every time I was around. I felt like an outsider in my own family, all because of Odessa's carefully planted lies. Then came the family brunch that changed everything. I was in the living room, chatting with a few cousins, when I heard Odessa's voice coming from the kitchen. She was talking quietly, but there was a sharpness to her tone that caught my attention. Curious, I moved closer to the doorway, straining to hear. "She's just so needy," Odessa was saying. "And I know it sounds harsh, but I honestly think Ilora is jealous. She's never had a serious relationship, and now that Clive and I are together, it's like she can't handle it." I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Jealous? Of her? I bit my lip, willing myself to stay calm, but her words kept coming, each one cutting deeper than the last. "Honestly, I think there might be something wrong with her," she continued, her tone laced with feigned concern. "She's so defensive all the time, and Clive has told me he's noticed it too. I mean, it's not normal, right? To act like that? I worry about her mental health, and the drinking doesn't help." That was it. I couldn't listen anymore. I stormed into the kitchen, my face flushed with anger. "Odessa, what the hell are you doing?" She turned to me, looking completely unbothered. "Oh, Ilora. I didn't see you there." Clearly, I spat, barely able to keep my voice steady. Do you get some kind of thrill out of spreading lies about me? Is that what this is? She gave me a pitying look, one that made my blood boil. Illyra, please, calm down. You're being dramatic. Dramatic? I could feel my hands shaking. You've been telling everyone that I'm jealous of you, that I'm some kind of alcoholic, that I have mental health issues. And now you're trying to paint me as some unstable, bitter woman? For what? What did I ever do to you? My mom stepped in, looking uncomfortable. Illyra, honey, maybe we should all just sit down and talk this out. Oh, please, Mom, I snapped, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. You've believed every word she said about me without even asking for my side of things. Did it ever occur to you that maybe Odessa isn't as perfect as she seems? Odessa let out a soft, mocking laugh. This is exactly what I mean. You're so defensive, Illyra. It's like you can't handle even the slightest bit of criticism. I turned to Clive, desperation and anger mixing in my voice. Clive, please. You know me. You know I would never. But he just looked away, refusing to meet my gaze. I don't know what you want me to say, Illyra. Odessa has only ever tried to help you. Something inside me broke in that moment. I felt like I was drowning, like I was trapped in some kind of twisted nightmare where no one could see the truth but me. I stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me, my vision blurred with tears. After that, I cut off contact. I couldn't bear to be around people who thought so little of me, who believed Odessa's lies over everything they'd known about me my entire life. The betrayal felt like a knife in my chest, and for a long time, I didn't think I'd ever recover. I threw myself into my work, building a new life for myself, one without the family I'd once been so close to. And it was hard. There were days I felt hollow, like a part of me had died. But I kept going. I found new friends, people who saw me for who I was, not some twisted version of myself. Years passed. I thought I'd put it all behind me. But then, one day, I received a message from an old family friend named Delphine. She'd heard through the grapevine about everything that had happened, and she had something to tell me. Illyra, I think you deserve to know the truth about Odessa, she wrote. And as I read her words, the pieces began to fall into place, one by one, like a puzzle I'd never realized I was solving. Odessa had a past, a dark one, that none of us had known about. Before she'd met Clive, she'd been married to another man in Seattle, a man she'd deceived and left with nothing, spinning a web of lies that had destroyed his life. She'd done the same thing to him that she'd done to me, manipulating everyone around her until she'd left him isolated and broken. As I sat there, staring at Delphine's message, a whirlwind of emotions tore through me, anger, vindication, sadness, and something else, something that felt a lot like rage. As I read Delphine's messages, I felt a storm of emotions. Odessa had done this before, manipulated people, ruined lives. It wasn't just me, it was her pattern. She'd destroyed another man, lied to everyone around him, and left him shattered. Now, she'd worked her way into my family and done the same thing, slowly isolating me, making me look like the crazy one. I was filled with anger but also a strange sense of clarity. Odessa had hurt me, yes, but she'd also lied to and manipulated my family, and in some way, that knowledge freed me. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposing her for who she was, about freeing my family from her lies. That night, I lay awake, planning my next move. I wanted to do this right. Odessa was cunning, she knew how to twist things and make herself look innocent. If I was going to bring her down, I needed to be meticulous. I needed proof. Delphine had already given me a start by sharing what she knew, but I knew I'd have to dig deeper. The next few weeks were a blur of research and calls. I reached out to people Odessa had known in Seattle, piecing together her past. Delphine put me in touch with her ex-husband, Brett. He was hesitant to talk at first, clearly still scarred from what Odessa had done to him, but when I explained what she'd done to me, he agreed to meet. We met in a quiet coffee shop, and Brett laid it all out for me. Odessa had married him, convinced him to put her name on everything, then slowly began isolating him from his friends and family. She'd spread rumors about him, implied he had a drinking problem, even made him question his own sanity. When he finally figured out what she was doing and tried to leave her, she filed a restraining order against him, claiming he'd been abusive. She got everything in the divorce, the house, the savings, even his dog. By the time she was done with him, Brett was left with nothing but his broken reputation. As he told his story, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This was my family's story, too, my story. She'd nearly destroyed me, and she'd done it without a second thought. I couldn't let her continue this. I gathered everything I had, Brett's statements, court documents, her lies. Piece by piece, I built a case that painted the true picture of Odessa, a picture of manipulation, deceit, and destruction. Then, when I had everything I needed, I reached out to my family. I invited them all to a quiet dinner at a local restaurant. My mom, my dad, Clive, and even Odessa. It had been years since I'd seen them, and I could tell they were nervous, unsure of what this was all about. Odessa looked as calm and collected as ever, giving me that infuriatingly patronizing smile as if I were still beneath her notice. Once everyone was seated, I took a deep breath and began. I wanted you all here tonight to talk about something important. About Odessa. Odessa's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, brushing it off with a light laugh. Illyra, what's this about? I kept my voice steady, calm. Odessa, I know who you really are. And it's time my family knows too. She tried to laugh again, but I could see the tension in her eyes. Illyra, this is ridiculous. Clive, your sister is clearly. But I cut her off, pulling out a folder and laying it on the table. I know about Brett, I said, locking eyes with her. Your first husband, the one you left with nothing. I know about the lies you told him, about the rumors you spread, how you manipulated his family just like you did with mine. The color drained from her face. Clive looked at her, confused, then back at me. Wait, Brett? Odessa was married before? She tried to keep up her facade, her voice wavering. That was a long time ago. It's nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this, I replied, sliding the folder toward Clive. These are court records, statements, proof of how she manipulated and destroyed him. And she's done the same thing to me, Clive. She isolated me, made you all think I was the problem, when all along it was her. My mom and dad looked at the documents, their faces twisted with confusion and horror. Clive, still staring at Odessa, looked as though he'd been slapped. Is this true? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Odessa's mask slipped then. For a second, I saw real panic in her eyes. But she quickly regained her composure, shrugging dismissively. Clive, don't be ridiculous. Illyra is just. She's making things up. She's always been jealous, always tried to come between us. Enough. Clive's voice was sharp, and for the first time, I saw her confidence falter. Is this true? He repeated, holding the documents up in his hand. Odessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around the table, her face pale, realizing she'd lost control of the narrative. Finally, she tried to turn it back on me, her voice shrill and desperate. This is all her doing. She's been trying to ruin my life, trying to turn you against me because she can't stand to see you happy. But Clive shook his head, his expression unreadable. I trusted you. We all did. But you lied, didn't you? Odessa's face hardened. She knew she'd been caught, and now, her kindness and innocence fell away, revealing a bitterness beneath. Fine, she hissed. Yes, I did what I had to do. You think I cared about Illyra? Or you? You were just convenient. The table went silent. My parents sat in shock, their eyes wide as they finally saw her for what she was. Clive, looking devastated, just shook his head and pushed his chair back. You should leave, Odessa. She looked at him, a flash of anger crossing her face. You're really choosing her over me? After everything I've done for you? But Clive didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Odessa stood, smoothing her dress, her face set in a hard, bitter expression. Fine. But remember this, Clive, you're nothing without me. None of you are. With that, she walked out of the restaurant, her heels clicking against the floor, her head held high. But I could see the truth in her eyes, she knew she'd lost. When she was gone, there was a long, painful silence. My mom reached across the table, her eyes filled with regret. Illyra, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I know, Mom. But now you do. Clive didn't say much that night, but as we all walked out of the restaurant, he put his arm around my shoulder, the way he used to when we were kids. It wasn't a full apology, but it was enough. In the weeks that followed, Odessa's reputation unraveled. I made sure her past became known to those around her. Without the support of my family, without Clive as her protector, she couldn't hide her true self anymore. Eventually, she left town, moving on to another place, another life where she'd try to do it all over again. But this time, I'd made sure her lies were out there, shadowing her wherever she went. As for me and my family, it took time, but we began to heal. Clive and I became close again, and my parents tried to make up for the years we'd lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Odessa's darkness no longer hovered over us, and I'd finally reclaimed my place in my family. I had exposed her for who she was, and for the first time in years, I felt free.